Man, I'm gonna need a nap after this one. So, the sometimes hotly contested topic of Hogwarts Legacy. What do I think? I won't be discussing any of the views of J.K. Rowling or anyone else, so if you're looking for that, you might as well click off now. All I'm concerned with today is whether this game is worth your money, and right off the bat, I'll tell you my answer is yes. It's not a perfect game, but with a borderline addictive gameplay loop, a serviceable main story, and plenty of side content to keep you entertained, I can say that I pretty easily recommend this title, but we'll be getting into a non spoiler review, so no need to concern yourself. That being said, let's not waste any time and hop into it. I have to say that while I was very excited to play this game, I had little to no expectations while doing my usual job of avoiding any info about the game I could in the lead up to its release. Let's get the bad out of the way first so we can end this on a positive note, shall we? My biggest complaint would have to be the typical day one issues that come with games of this scale that we do see in various frame rate issues. I know for a lot of people, especially coming from console expectations, frame rate and frame rate drops aren't something that really bother you, but for me, it's one of the biggest irritations I get in games, and part of that is from the system I built a game on. My specs are listed on the screen so you can get an idea of what to expect. I'm playing on 1440p high preset with textures and lighting bumped up to ultra with DLSS on balanced. For the most part, the game runs fine enough, and actually in combat where I'd expect the most issues, it actually feels better than most of the game. And I only had one major slowdown during my playthrough that was notable. That being said, you can see on the screen here when you're in more densely populated areas, and especially when you've just loaded into Hogsmeade for whatever reason, the frame rate can absolutely tank on you, feeling like booting up an early access game on a 2 generation old PlayStation. I've got Afterburner running on the screen, so you can see the numbers on the screen for yourself, but honestly, you can probably just see the frame rate drops. I wouldn't call this unplayable. I mean, I got 30 hours out of the game by any means, but if this kind of stuff bothers you, then you'll want to know now rather than when you get the game. Early issues like this tend to be resolved by a couple of patches that, based on the popularity of this game, it's more than likely to be getting, so I wouldn't put too much stock into it. That being said, there is one other negative that I need to discuss, and that's the main story itself. If you follow the kind of games I play, then you know that I'm often heavily influenced by a game's narrative when deciding whether a game is worth recommending or not, but that isn't always true, and Hogwarts Legacy will be another exception to that. The story isn't awful by any means, but it's definitely just a vessel to get you from place to place and set piece to set piece so you can take part in cool events. I mean, this right here is the protagonist's reaction to a major character's death literally seconds after it happened. And I have to be honest, I didn't really care much when it happened either, so I will say it didn't really break my immersion at the very least. They seem to have wanted you to feel some level of sympathy for the main villain and their cause, but frankly, it's an almost comically straightforward evil villain, and I found no real sympathy for them. And I especially didn't see a world in which their plan would bring about a better world. There was definitely a way to make the antagonist sympathetic, and I see the vision, but when it devolves into, oh, I'm gonna do evil stuff, there's not much room for nuance. Frankly, Starro the Conqueror and Suicide Squad was able to garner a more emotional reaction from me with exactly one line of dialogue than I got in over 30 hours at Hogwarts.
I was happy, floating, staring at the stars.
That being said, however, like in many open world games, the side missions have storylines, with one in particular that is absolutely excellent and managed to keep me in the gray morally for the majority of the quest. And while I may have known how I felt about that particular character's actions at the end of the quest, reflecting on the choices he made, I found a sense of empathy easily understanding why he had made the bad choices that he had. And to be honest, while working alongside him, I made some rather dubious choices myself, so I wasn't on any moral high ground. It was truly a case of the path to hell is paved with good intentions, and I love that in games. I walked away feeling like I had made a ton of mistakes, and yet wouldn't have done anything differently. Moving on from the narrative, though, is when we get to the game's real strengths in the game's exploration and combat. It can't be understated that the level of love and nostalgia you have for the Harry Potter franchise will have a direct impact on how you perceive the game. The more you love it, the more fun you're going to have. I will say on a personal level that I didn't quite feel the magic that I do rewatching the movies or visiting Universal Studios, but I think part of that is Hogwarts Legacy is set well apart from the story I know and love. I appreciate that it had the confidence to tell its own story and that it does justice to the universe it's in. It's not the Hogwarts I grew up in, but it's still the one I know, if that makes any sense. Minor spoiler here, but you won't be taking the train or the boats into the castle during the intro, and it's for a solid enough reason as the intro goes on to establish our own protagonist, but man, I would have enjoyed it. My Debbie Downer status aside, I will say exploring the castle itself is great fun and all the classes feel just right. I think I just put together why the magic is lacking while I'm writing this, and that's that you don't really have any friends at Hogwarts, at least not great ones. You'll meet plenty of people you'll call friends over the course of the game, but in reality they're little more than quest givers, and they feel like it. For the majority of the game, you're essentially solo even when you're accompanied by someone. There's no Ron solving the wizard's chess problem or Hermione dealing with spells you've never heard of. It just doesn't keep it lively. The castle itself, however, is lively with a constant flow of movement that I just love. From students talking about class, practicing magic, or just goofing around, it feels very lively. There's various different statues that you have to figure out how to get information out of, so that's a fun little mini puzzle to solve. Alongside things like interactable objects, the famous talking paintings, ghosts floating around, and some seriously funny suits of armor, it just feels like you're in this magical world that you know and love. Exploration outside the castle isn't too shabby either, with more than enough to keep you entertained, and while the broom isn't my favorite means of travel across gaming, it serves its purpose well enough in the grand scheme of things, giving you a scenic and speedy way to get from place to place. The open world has plenty of stuff for you to get caught up in, and while I admit I didn't care for most of it and hated some of it, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there doing Merlin trials to their heart's content. I will say that while I'm glad they exist, I wish there was actually something special about the special enemies marked around the map for you to fight. Most of the time, if they didn't have a different name on their inflated health bar, you probably wouldn't notice any difference from their normal counterparts. This isn't world ending, however, because the combat in the game, especially once you unlock a wide variety of spells, is actually my highlight of the whole experience. It can feel a bit frustrating from time to time when a missed or seemingly time-delayed input can cost you in a battle, but for the most part the combat has a fantastic flow. In bigger battles later into the game, it can feel like you're both on the attack and defense simultaneously, and that's in part because you are, with your blocks having the option to send back a stun, Stupefy, that leaves your opponent open to immediate counterattack that creates the whole flow of combat. Hearing the same spells coming out of your character's mouth over and over and over again is solid from an immersion standpoint, but to be honest, at a certain point it became annoying. Speaking of annoying is my one real gripe with the combat, but indirectly. Sometimes for no discernible reason this game gets absurdly loud for no damn reason and can have you pulling your headphones away to protect your ears. I mean, seriously, headphone users beware, but I need to show you what I'm talking about. First we'll get a normal game clip in combat, and then whatever the hell happened.
No! Reducto! You'll feel that tomorrow.
Incendio. Expelliarmus. Confringo. Protego.
I mean, how does that get play tested and approved? Also, while I'm bitching about gear inventory upgrades being tied to Merlin trials is some hot ass. Back to the good though, the combat in this game really does have me wanting to fight more often than not, with my stealthy adventures really only coming for narrative reasons or a lack of health potions available. The stealth itself is fine, but it really feels like the game wasn't designed for it most of the time, and honestly, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't need that element to succeed. Even though I thought the best fights were part of the main story missions, along with the worst, there's plenty of bandit encampments, small and large, for you to contend with throughout the valley, along with battle arenas where you can beat back waves of enemies for fun. I wouldn't say that there's a huge depth to spell choice when it comes to combat. I'm sure there's people out there who've already mastered all the high level combos and can wreak absolute havoc, but honestly for my money, keeping my strongest combat spells locked and loaded and firing them off during openings was enough, only using other spells to either forcibly relocate an opponent or take down their shields. And while I did a pretty much exclusively good wizard run, spells like Avada Kedavra have an epic spectacle to them that makes being evil all the more enticing. While the visuals in the game aren't groundbreaking by any means, they do an excellent job fitting the game that they're in. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to wrap it up before I accidentally spoil something. Overall, I can heartily recommend Hogwarts Legacy to anyone who's already a fan of the wizarding world we grew up with, and if you just think it looks fun, I can say I easily recommend it to you as well. Don't bother with the deluxe version at this point because its only real purpose is the early access, and I cannot recommend the extra money on a few in-game items that are inconsequential. A friend of mine asked me to rate several aspects of the game, and after a review, I stick by my scores, so I'll share them with you now. Main stories is 6 out of 10, side stories 7 out of 10, gameplay 8.5 out of 10, exploration and setting 8 out of 10, and fun factor being a 9 out of 10. If you follow my channel, you know I'm very into story-intensive games, and I just came off possibly the best ever told in Red Dead Redemption 2, so don't think it's an awful story. It just isn't great. It's mediocre at best. But it didn't bother me in the end. That's really all there is to say without getting into story spoilers, and honestly, I just don't think they're worth either of our time to get into, so I'm going to wrap it up right here. This is Purple signing off. Have a wonderful night, and always remember to smile. Thanks, guys.